Feet of the Masters is so important because what we have lost in our understanding of how spiritual knowledge is an energetic transfer between a master and his disciple. Energetically, it occurs through word, through vibration, through understanding. We believe that somehow there is a quotient of information that we will take in spiritually somehow in this life, that we will somehow quantify into human understanding, and somehow we will just suddenly have enlightenment or attain to samadhi, ecstasy, or nirvana. The feet of the Masters is the integral point that has been lost that we must restore, which is the transmission point between those who have come before and those who remain behind. And we are they. We are the ones who remain behind. And we need to restore that link between those masters and us. We must sit at their feet. We must look into their eyes. We must receive of their vibration. We must enter into their words. We must enter into their eyes. We must enter into their vibration. And by so doing, we will receive that enlightenment point. We will not receive it in any other way. We will be taking this journey sequentially from the beginning of time to the present day. So we will travel through the world face, beginning with Hinduism and moving through Sikhism, Jainism, Judaism, through Talmudists, Kabbalah, mystery religions, Zoroastrianism, Buddhism, Pure Land, Tibetan Buddhism, Tantric Buddhism, Zen and Taoism, Confucianism and Christianity, Native American and tribal religions, African, Aboriginal, Islam, the Sufis, and finally the Baha'is. And we do this in sequential order so that we can follow the advent of the revelations of God as He has presented them to us throughout time and eternity. Krishna, one must deliver himself with the help of his mind and not degrade himself. The mind is the friend of the conditioned soul and his enemy as well. For him who has conquered the mind is the best of friends. But for one who has failed to do so, his mind will remain the greatest enemy. That's from the Bhagavad Gita, words of Krishna. He had a very similar birth, ironically, but different to Christianity. What was different is that he was foreordained to be born of Devaki, who is our second master. But the brother of Devaki was so jealous of this that she killed the first 7 children that she had before Krishna was born, and they had to go to great measures to secure Krishna when he was born and whittle him off to someone else who was going to raise him as her son in order to protect him from being murdered also. So Devaki, she was imprisoned most of her life by her own brother for this very reason, because there was the prophecy that of her would come Krishna. Similarly to Christianity, despite all odds, it still happened. the texts about the life of Krishna, the Srimad Bhagavatam and the Bhagavad Gita, which is part of the Srimad Bhagavatam, where it was the play of life. So Krishna really enjoyed embodiment. He reveled in playing the flute and frolicking around the fields and playing with his friends. So there was playfulness. It's unfortunate that some of that has been lost in Christianity, but when you experience Christ in the spirit, that is also present with him and with most of the masters, depending on what you are seeing them for, because sometimes they're very serious, but there is that playfulness that is present within part of the whole spiritual life. A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada, from the Srimad Bhagavatam, Devaki, the mother of Krishna, offered her prayers. She said, "My dear Lord, your eternal forms and millions of similar incarnations emanating from Vishnu are described in the Vedic literature as original. Such eternal forms are ever cognizant and full of bliss. They are situated in transcendental goodness and are always engaged in different pastimes. You are not limited to a particular form only. All such transcendental eternal forms are self-sufficient. I can understand that you are supreme." Devaki and Vasudeva, who actually gave birth to Krishna, but it was Yashoda and Nanda who brought him up because they had to switch the babies in order to save Krishna from the crazy brother-in-law. Kamsa was the brother who was determined to prevent Krishna from being born. Again, what an interesting phenomenon. Look at this, because we've talked about this before, trying to control God. Take a look at this, and you have Kamsa killing 7 children to prevent the incarnation of Krishna. And then you have the slaughter of the innocents to prevent the incarnation of the Messiah in Christ. And you've seen this in many eras of time. So you see that this is one of the means and ways in which evil does utilize to try to control God. In the accounts at the time of Krishna's birth, it says, "There were auspicious stars visible in the sky, and on that surface in all towns and villages and pasturing grounds, and within the minds of everyone there were signs of good fortune. The rivers were flowing full of waters, and lakes were beautifully decorated with lotus flowers. The forests were full with beautiful birds and peacocks. Just on the point of Krishna's appearance, automatically their minds became full of joy because they could hear transcendental vibrations in the sky proclaiming the appearance of the Supreme Personality of Godhead." But then when we go on to Babaji, one of the things he would say was, "Love is the undisturbed balance that binds this universe together." Just one little thing he says here. There is so much more in this sentence because it is reflected in the tachyon fields when you travel through them, that love is the undisturbed balance that binds this universe together. It is impossible to adequately express what the word, because the word love is not adequate for what that actually means in terms of vibration, energy, and field of being. There is so much more in what those words say than meets the eye. That's a good point to meditate upon. And so he continued by saying, "Even in the world, the yogi who faithfully discharges his responsibilities without personal motive or attachment treads the sure path of enlightenment." And then he had a companion by the name of Mataji. There are no words attributed to her that I could find anywhere, but she has been memorialized and commemorated throughout the ages that she did exist. We do have some of these masters where that's all we have, is their image. So Lord Kapila is another one of the Kriya Yoga masters. One of the things that he would say, "The stage in which the consciousness of the living entity is attracted by the 3 modes of material nature is called conditional life. But when that same consciousness is attached to the Supreme Personality of Godhead, one is situated in the consciousness of liberation. That's from the teachings of Lord Kapila, translated by A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada. And that is an excellent explanation right there of what Kriya Yoga is, and one of the things that is explained in the Lord of the Redemption about this thread of similarity between many of the ancient texts, between Buddhism, Hinduism, Christianity, and otherwise, of devotion on a holy name, devotion to a holy name, and how that actually, in and of itself, alters your realm of perception. And that's what he's talking about right there. I personally like the older stuff versus the newer stuff, the contemporary stuff, because there's a level of authenticity to it that sometimes in the more contemporary accountings we can water things down, whereas in the ancient writings they're less likely to do so. The Sankhya is also talking about this understanding of devotion and what devotion does to bring about the vibration of the soul. Even just to go back to this one quote that I pulled out on him, we'll just go back to it for a second. The stage in which the consciousness of the living entity is attracted by the three modes of material nature is called conditional life. So that's us when we're just focused on the ground. But when that same consciousness is attached to the Supreme Personality of Godhead, when we are just literally shifting our focus from that singular focus on the material world to the divine name, the divine reality, we immediately become situated in the consciousness of liberation. He's speaking of vibration there. One of the things about the masters that I'd like people to understand is people read their words and they read these texts, but one of the things they're not understanding is that vibrationally these books and these texts and these words mean many things on many, many different levels of vibration. And you may understand it on this physical level, but you're not getting it because you're not really understanding. But this is why it's vibrational. Knowledge is vibration. And remember, Babaji said, love is the undisturbed balance that binds this universe together. When he's speaking about love as the undisturbed balance, he's speaking about something much greater than that. That the realizations come on energetic levels. Something changes vibrationally. It's like, oh, now I understand why she was pointing out that that sentence is basically laying out the tachyon fields. Listen closely to what Babaji is saying, because it contains the secret. Love is the undisturbed balance that binds this universe together. That explains what the tachyon fields are. And that is the goal. That is where the human soul has to reach in order to finish up here, in order to finalize their time, their sojourn here in this realm. One of the things that we do as humans is we hear these things, we dismiss them, we move on, or we want to keep talking about it too much, so much so that we almost dilute it. We don't want to dilute it. I want people to hear exactly what he said, and I don't want to expand on it because he said it exactly as it is. Love is the undisturbed balance that binds this universe together. That's what you take to meditation with you. You let the Holy Spirit reveal that to you. Babaji might reveal it to you because he does help souls. He's come to help me a few times throughout the years, and the masters do this. They come back and assist. We want to just be careful with it. You don't want to add too much to what they say because they know what they're doing. Sometimes we don't understand it until years later. And ironically here, Prahlada Maharaja, another practitioner of Kriya Yoga, says this very well. Exactly what we're talking about. He says, through practices one cannot behold God. He can be seen through inner longing. The next two mystics are Sri Ramakrishna and then his wife, Sri Sharada Devi, who is often called the Holy Mother. She was the wife of Sri Ramakrishna in the 1800s, the late 1800s. Sri Ramakrishna was a great mystic, and his wife was considered a great mystic and sage as well. Sri Ramakrishna would say, as long as you live outside the house of Maya, as long as there exists the cloud of Maya, you do not see the effect of the sun of knowledge. What he's trying to get us to understand is, as long as we are here on the ground, viewing things from physical reality, we cannot see eternal reality. We just simply cannot. It's not possible. And Sri Sharada Devi, the master is always with you. You have many more things to accomplish for the welfare of the world. So we always remember the master is always with us, but we must not lose ourselves to the point where we forget that we are to be at work in the fields of the Lord as well. Maya, the illusions that we have to maintain our physical lives, our physical reality, and the illusions that hold us up in the physical world but do not necessarily reflect spiritual reality, the eternal truth. Another contemporary of Sri Ramakrishna, in fact, he was one of his main disciples, was Swami Vivekananda, who would say, all love is expansion. All selfishness is contraction. Love is therefore the only law of life. He who loves lives. He who is selfish is dying. Therefore, love for love's sake. Because it is the only law of life, just as you breathe to live. Simple, but yet there's a great amount of profundity in it. Because again, we're talking what Babaji said just a few minutes ago. Now he's bringing it to this level of understanding that if we are to ever encapsulate what love actually is as energy, as field, as God, we have to view love and the act of loving as we do breathing. It has to become that natural. He also said, all power is within you. You can do anything and everything. Believe in that. Do not believe that you are weak. Do not believe that you are half crazy lunatics, as most of us do nowadays. You can do anything and everything without even the guidance of anyone. Stand up and express the divinity within you. Those who do become awake are often ostracized just a little bit for being a little bit different than the rest. And it's a call to courage, that's what we're here to do, just do it. Another great mystic is Gandhi. He was also a political leader, as everyone knows, and liberator of India in peaceful, nonviolent ways. One of the things that he said, I think really coincide well with what we're talking about with the words of these other masters. An eye for an eye only ends up making the whole world blind. Happiness is when what you think, what you say, and what you do are in harmony. Very well stated. Happiness is when what you think, what you say, and what you do are in harmony. That's called the path of purification in a nutshell. Gandhi also said, where there is love, there is life. And again, another excellent summarization of vibration and field. There's a lot within the words of the masters I'd like people to listen to as vibration and field, because that's where it's going to have the impact. And look into their eyes, sit at their feet. Our next master is Swami Sri Yukteswar, who was Paramahamsa Yogananda's master. He said a few things, so I'm just going to have some fun with him. He said, everything in the future will improve if you're making a spiritual effort now. One of the mistakes many of us make is we forget that no matter what's going on, we have to be putting forth that daily effort for that improvement. He says, forget the past. Says attachment is blinding. It lends an imaginary halo of attractiveness to the object of desire. Remember that finding God will mean the funeral of all sorrows. Remember that finding God will mean the funeral of all sorrows. And he also spoke, because he also was a great ascetic. He said, a beggar cannot renounce wealth. But speaking of him, Paramahamsa Yogananda, one of his best known disciples, I put down quite a few things with him just because I've seen him a lot in my out-of-body experiences over the years, and I'm a big fan. I really love him a lot. A lot of what he says is really, really important to all of us. And this again, right here, truth is no theory, no speculative system of philosophy. Truth is exact correspondence with reality with a capital R. That's what we call energetic knowledge, the eternal truth. That's what he's talking about. When we talk about, well, what is the truth? It's not some nebulous thing that people can just make up. As we uplift our own vibration, we are actually pulling up the vibration of the realm. A lot of people don't realize that, and that's important to know as well. So one of the things that Paramahamsa Yogananda said about samadhi I liked. Samadhi but extends my conscious realm beyond limits of the mortal frame to farthest boundary of eternity, where I, the cosmic sea, watch the little ego floating in me. Thought is inexhaustible. Since the world began, thoughts in unimaginable numbers have passed through the ether. One could not begin to count them. But he also spoke in response to what his own master said, the season of failure is the best time for sowing the seeds of success. And the next master is actually one of Paramahamsa Yogananda's favorite disciples, Sri Jnanamata. She was a female disciple of Paramahamsa Yogananda. She has a book that was written, I believe it was written about her books, but it has a lot of her writings in it too. And Paramahamsa Yogananda wrote a beautiful eulogy about her at the time of her passing. He declared her a saint. He said, she has finished her work when he heard of her death. As a great saint said, insult not my dust with your pity, ye who are left on this desolate shore, still to mourn and deplore. It is I who pity you. She is actually pitying a great many here, though of course she can't pity those who are on their way to freedom. Mother Divine, this is a prayer he wrote for her, break the troth of mine with thee about good sister. Release, if thou will, mother dear. Her test is greater than she can bear from this nightmare of suffering. Take her to the wakefulness of ever new bliss. And he says that at the moment of her death, a great light appeared to him, and he saw sister in the arms of the Divine Mother. He cried out, sister, do not go, wait. And even that desire was fulfilled. Those spiritual footprints will always be there. And Sri Jnanamata has her own legacy with the Self-Realization Fellowship that Paramahamsa Yogananda founded, as do many of his disciples who are following in his footsteps, achieving attainments of their own accord through his guidance that continues from beyond. Moving on to the next masters whose feet we are pausing through, Maharishi Mahesh Yogi. He passed away in the late 20th century. Many remember him from the 1970s. The Beatles were really interested in him and his teachings, but there's a whole group of people who follow him in Fairfield, Iowa. But his books are known all around the world. The Science of Being and Art of Living is the most famous one that he wrote, and this is from that. It says, in a state where being is fully maintained, the process of experience becomes powerful, and the experience of the object becomes deeper and fuller than before. This art of being on the level of experience is natural in a fully integrated life where one is able to live all values of the transcendental, absolute bliss consciousness of being together with experiences of the various aspects of relative creation. And later on in the same text, he writes, in fact, just a couple pages later, he says, the simple fact that being is the never-changing eternal phase of existence, and that it pervades diverse forms of phenomenal creation, gives us the hope of bringing all the diversified phases of our lives into harmony by coordinating their values with the values of absolute being. So that was Maharishi Mahesh Yogi, definitely known for bringing transcendental meditation, the practice of it, to the United States and around the world. People still learn that practice everywhere. So his legacy continues. And our next master is A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada, founder of the Krishna consciousness movement. He was a little controversial at his time. One of the most prolific writers and translators of Hindu texts as well. He was a big teacher of Kriya yoga, and that was the path that they taught. And he would say, anyone who is steady in his determination for the advanced stage of spiritual realization and can equally tolerate the onslaughts of distress and happiness is certainly a person eligible for liberation. So he's speaking here, of course, that part of the transcendental consciousness that we all seek and the awakening and the transformation is the ability to be able to move through the minefields of existence, which includes the highs and the lows, and be able to move through them with equal fervor. Guru Nanak, founder of the Sikh religion, their text is called the Sri Guru Granth Sahib. I am not the born. How can there be either birth or death for me? Death would not be called bad, O people, if one knew how to truly die. Whatever kind of seed is sown in a field, prepared in due season, a plant of that same kind, marked with the peculiar qualities of the seed, springs up in it. We don't often give enough attentiveness to that which we are sowing, but we want to make sure that we take close observation of that which we are sowing, because a plant of the same kind, marked with the peculiar qualities of the seeds we are sowing, will spring up from it. Hazur Maharaj Swan Sinj was a really practical mystic in some ways. In other ways, profoundly mystical too. The devil can only enter your mind through whisperings. I am pausing for a reason, because the reason why is because a gossip is the door to the devil for probably 99% of all human beings. Now you're forced to deal with the fact that if you engage, the devil's entering your mind. All dishonest earnings are the blood of the innocent. Honest earnings are like sweet milk and make the mind pious. Puts into perspective how important it is, right way of living, actual spiritual practice. Love never perishes, even if the bones of a lover are ground fine like powder, just as the perfume of sandalwood does not leave it, even if it is completely ground up. Similarly, the basis of love is the soul, and it is indestructible and therefore eternal. Beauty can be destroyed, but not love. The Tirthankara Jainism. Tirthankara is literally a forward maker, a savior and spiritual teacher of the righteous path in Jainism. The Tirthankaras are those souls who offer passage across the sea of interminable births and deaths, across samsara. According to Jainism, a Tirthankara as an individual has conquered the samsara, the cycle of death and rebirth. Samsara is the world of illusion, on their own, and made a path for others to follow. After understanding the true nature of the self or soul, the Tirthankara attains what they call Kevala Jnana, which is omniscience. And the first Tirthankara founded Jainism. Tirthankara provides a bridge for others to follow the new teacher from samsara to Mahavira Swami, which is liberation in Jainism. One of the most famous of the Tirthankaras, Mahavira, he was the 24th Jain Tirthankara, one of the principal figures of Jainism. He's the most well-known. And so one of the things he would say was, attachment and aversion are the root cause of karma. And karma originates from infatuation. Karma is the root cause of birth and death, and these are said to be the source of misery. None can escape the effect of their own past karma. Anger begets more anger, and forgiveness and love lead to more forgiveness and love. Are you moving towards life? Are you moving towards death? What are you energizing? The most important principle of environment is that you are not the only element. I'm going to leave that one standing alone. Kill not, cause no pain, non-violence is the greatest religion. And that is the foundational point of Jainism, because, they are not only vegetarian, vegan, but they are very, very stringent in their care for all other forms of life. We're entering into Judaism. Moses, I'm going to read to you from the Torah, Deuteronomy 32, 50 to 52, the words of God to Moses. What's important to think of when you listen to these words is just how much God expects of us when we are called. Because think about everything that Moses had done for the Israelite people and that God had asked him to do. This was because he had not done so perfectly. And this is important because it tells us much is expected of us. You shall die on the mountain that you are about to ascend, and shall be gathered to your kin as your brother Aaron died on Mount Hor and was gathered to his kin. For you both broke faith with me among the Israelite people at the waters of Meribah Kadesh in the wilderness of Zin by failing to uphold my sanctity among the Israelite people. You may view the land from a distance, but you shall not enter it, the land that I am giving to the Israelite people. I do think people sometimes do not realize the requirement placed on souls who are called. This definitely tells us this and shares with us that requirement. It allows us to have a better understanding ourselves if we are discerning a call, what will be asked of us. Things are intense. This is from Deuteronomy 18, which is also speaking of Moses. This is God speaking about what he was going to do with Moses. I will put my words in his mouth, and he will speak to them whatever I command him. And it shall be, any man who does not hearken to my words, which he speaks in my name, I myself will require a reckoning from him. From the writings and visions of the Venerable Anne Catherine Emmerich, it was these very same writings which were utilized for the movie The Passion of the Christ. It was based on the dolorous passion of our Lord Jesus Christ by the Venerable Anne Catherine Emmerich. That book was taken out of this 4-volume series. This quote comes from the same text, from the same mystic. And this is about Moses, and it's about redemption and salvation. And on the same night that Moses took possession of the holy thing, a golden casket shaped like a coffin was prepared, in which at their departure the Israelites took it with them. In the center of this coffin-like chest was placed a little golden casket, wherein was contained the holy thing. Only afterward on Mount Sinai was made the chest inlaid with gold inside and outside, and in it the golden mummiform coffin with the holy thing was placed. And she's speaking about the Ark of the Covenant. But this is how the Venerable Anne Catherine Emmerich described it. These are the words of Moses from the 5 books of Moses. This is from an earlier text. I have seen God face to face, and my life has been saved. And of course, the most important thing that Moses brought to humankind was the 10 Commandments from the Mount Sinai. In short, most people are pretty familiar with them. You shall have no other gods before me. You shall not make idols. You shall not take the name of the Lord your God in vain. Remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. Honor your father and your mother. You shall not murder. You shall not commit adultery. You shall not steal. You shall not bear false witness against your neighbor. You shall not covet. So Moses' great unction, great calling to the world was to bring the law and the prophets to the Israelite people, and of course to free them from captivity from Egypt and to establish Israel, which he all accomplished, but it was difficult, it was hard, it was tough. The next one in Judaism, we kind of go backwards a bit. We go back to Abraham. With Abraham, it's an interesting one because Abraham was so far back, it's hard to find actual words attributed to him. But we do have some. He said, let there be no strife, I pray thee, between me and thee, and between my herdsmen and thy herdsmen, for we be brethren. Another thing that Abraham was famous and notable for, and quite auspicious for, was the fact that he is the one who is known for bargaining for the lives of the people who were left behind in Sodom and Gomorrah. So this comes from some of that, where he was able to convince God to release Lot and his brethren to save the righteous few. And it says, wilt thou indeed sweep away the righteous with the wicked? Peradventure there are 50 righteous within the city. Wilt thou indeed sweep away and not forgive the place for the 50 righteous that are therein? That be far from thee to do after this manner, to slay the righteous with the wicked, that so the righteous should be as the wicked that be far from thee. Shall not the judge of all the earth do justly? Behold now, I have taken upon me to speak unto the Lord, who am but dust and ashes. Peradventure there shall lack 5 of the 50 righteous. Wilt thou destroy all the city for lack of 5? O let not the Lord be angry, and I will speak yet but this once. Peradventure 10 shall be found there. And this is kind of a summarization of the conversation in prayer back and forth between Abraham and God, going from 50 all the way down to 10, where God relents. God relents to Abraham. He says, I will not smite the city for 10 just souls. And then he sends the angels to liberate Lot and his family from Sodom and Gomorrah before the natural disasters that struck. But what made Abraham so unique as one of our masters was this, that he negotiated with God in this way, but also that he was truly the first from the land of Canaan, came out of a land of paganism and a land where multiple gods, multiple idols. He was the first to go and literally the God of Abraham, the father of all the monotheistic religions, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, is Abraham. And so there is his significance to all of us, because literally, I believe they've done DNA and we're all related to him. So he's like everyone's great grandpa. So he's pretty auspicious. And the next one is Enoch, one of my personal favorites, because, Enoch was a great mystic and was shown the valleys of good and evil and the realms in between. He walked with God as they spoke of him in the Bible, but there were the books that were kept out of the canon of the Old Testament, which were the secret books of Enoch and the Book of Enoch. There's several secret books of Enoch. In those books, we get one of our first cosmologies of heaven, hell, and purgatory ever from Enoch. And Enoch was the soul who, after he translated from the world, became Metatron, the great archangel Metatron. And so here are some words attributed to Enoch. He showed me all the hidden things of the extremities of heaven, all the receptacles of the stars, and the splendors of all from whence they went forth before the face of the holy. And this quote, again, going back to the message that is conveyed through many ancient sacred texts: I will bring them into the splendid light of those who love my holy name. And I will place each of them on a throne of glory peculiarly his own. Righteous is the judgment of God. There's a few quotes from the Zohar, which are some of the great rabbis of ancient memory. Ye truly virtuous, enter and see, for permission is given you to enter as far as the place where this curtain is hung. Happy is your lot. Of course, they're speaking of the interior of the temple, where only the priests could go, or the temple where the curtain was hung. That was only certain high priests could go there. When the Holy One created man, he set in him all the images of the supernal mysteries of the world above, and all the images of the lower mysteries of the world below, and all are designed in man, who stands in the image of God. Our next master is not someone that everyone always thinks of when you think of a master, because people think, what a sad story, and they don't realize, oh, this is a master, and this is the story of Job. But here are some of the words attributed to Job, who was truly a master because he retained his faith in God and was able to stand strong through the most vicious sufferings, which many of us could not endure. And Job speaks ironically of out-of-body travel when he says, in a dream, in a vision of the night, when deep sleep falleth upon men, in slumberings upon the bed, then he openeth the ears of men, and sealeth their instruction. People think out-of-body travel is a new thing, and it's not. Mother Teresa would say to people that God must trust you a great deal to be willing to give you such great suffering. And one other thing that Job would say is, which is the way to the dwelling place of the light? And where is the abode of darkness? That you may take them to their boundaries and set them on their homeward paths. A statement of the purification pathway from thousands of years ago. And then Baruch Spinoza, who was a Jewish philosopher, he struggled as a master, trying to figure out where he stood, what he believed. He who lives under the guidance of reason endeavors as far as possible to render back love or kindness for other men's hatred, anger, contempt, etc. toward him. It's from the Ethics of Spinoza. Most of the things that we have from him were from a book he wrote called The Ethics. We should in the same way reflect on courage as a means of overcoming fear. The ordinary dangers of life should frequently be brought to mind and imagined, together with the means whereby, through readiness of resource and strength of mind, we can avoid and overcome them. So what he's talking about there is discipline. He's talking about the practices of being in a state of preparation for unpredictabilities of life and actually doing a daily practice that disciplines the mind to be ready for them. Another great Jewish philosopher, more famous, was Moses Maimonides. Do not consider it proof just because it is written in books. For a liar who will deceive with his tongue will not hesitate to do the same with his pen. And how many people realize this is the source of this very famous saying we still talk about and use all the time today. Give a man a fish and you feed him for a day. Teach a man to fish and you feed him for a lifetime. That was Moses Maimonides who said that. The risk of a wrong decision is preferable to the terror of indecision. Another Jewish philosopher, Moses Mendelssohn. Divine religion does not prod men with an iron rod. It guides them with bands of love. It draws no avenging sword, dispenses no temporal goods, assumes no right to any earthly possessions, and claims no external power over the mind. Its weapons are reason and persuasion. Its strength is the divine power of truth. Time is a part of eternity and of the same peace with it. We're going to go through some people, a lot of rabbis, not as well known, but well known to the Jewish people. Rebecca Gratz was the founder of the first Jewish Sunday school and orphanage in America, 1900s. If I had been provided with agreeable intelligence, you would have heard from me long ago, but to repeat the same dull talk could afford you little satisfaction, and therefore I have been silent. When you think about her time, that she accomplished a great deal in her period of time where it was harder for women to do that. So Rabbi Joseph Kahaman, they called him the Panavazir Rav. He was extremely careful to avoid speaking any words of the Zionist language. So in some Jewish circles, depending on which circles, they will speak mostly ancient or modern Hebrew. And in his case, he spoke ancient Hebrew and would try to stay away from the modern Hebrew, which is the Zionist language. A little anecdote about him. Once Rabbi Azura Kushner, a teacher in a yeshiva in Miami Beach, asked the Ponvezer Rav to give a lecture in his yeshiva. The students of this yeshiva did not know Yiddish, and the Ponvezer Rav did not speak English, so they were in a quandary as to how he should communicate with them. Finally, it was decided he would speak in classical Hebrew, the holy tongue. So he began in halting Hebrew, but after a minute, he switched to his native Yiddish for the remainder of the lecture. Afterwards, Rabbi Kushner asked him why he'd done this. The Rav replied, "I am careful to avoid using any word that was invented by the Zionists. Someone from our community published a dictionary indicating that words may be used, but it is very hard to remember, and it was taking too long, so I had no choice but to speak in Yiddish." It's kind of similar to some of the issues that came out of Catholicism when they switched to the native tongues from the Latin. where it's still very important to use the original classical Hebrew. The next one is Rabbi Eleazar Kaller, and he actually is one of the writers of the liturgical poems in the Jewish prayer book. A lot of people don't understand that the Liturgy of the Hours in the Catholic tradition is an extension of the prayer of the hours that began in the Jewish tradition. So all of these things are intricately woven together. When you read the Jewish prayer book, remember Rabbi Eleazar, who was one of the great authors of many of those prayers. And we have Rabbi Elio Toph, and one of the things that he would say was, the heart opens itself to the hope that the misfortunes of the past will be replaced by fruitful dialogue. I think we can all appreciate that. And the next master is Rabbi Barbat. He was a Torah teacher, and I tried very hard to find something that he might have spoken, but as a Torah teacher, he would teach the 5 books of Moses to his students diligently and faithfully throughout his life. Rabbi Karabi ben Ishay, also known as the Chofetz Chaim, he personally funded the publishing of his own books, refusing sponsorship or charity, and any income from those books were always distributed to the poor. The Chofetz Chaim was also responsible for most of the writings on Lashon Hara, recluse. He wrote a book called Echoes in the Heavenly Court, which is a beautiful book, hard to come by these days. I'm very lucky to have a copy, about the importance of speech, using our words carefully. Chofetz Chaim is one of those truly incandescent masters who really stands tall across all faiths, and so he's very important. The seminal work, the Ben Ish Chai, and he would say in this book, may your home be open wide, may the poor be members of your household. A person generous of heart seeks to have the hungry enter his home and satiated. You are therefore commanded that the poor be members of your household. This refers to those members of the household who are in charge of your property and your kitchen, who dwell in your home as tenants. Choose people who were once poor, who are familiar with the hardships of poverty, whether with hunger or with deprivation that affect the body's health. How harsh and bitter these lacks can be for the needy person, and leave them helpless, so that they may be filled with pity for the needy, who are forced to knock at your door. Respond to their plea and give them what they require from the food and drink with the house that has been blessed, and not send them away empty-handed. And this comes from the Mishnah. The Mishnahs are teachings on the scriptures from Hasdei Evot, from that seminal work, Ben Ish Chai, from Rabbi Karabi ben Ishay. And our next master, Rabbi Satmar, from the Satmar lineage, which is actually a lineage of rabbis that is cross-generational. And they are characterized by a very religious, extremely strict religious adherence, complete rejection of modern culture, fierce anti-Zionism. They sponsor comprehensive education and media systems in Yiddish. They use Yiddish as their primary language. And they also had the Central Rabbinical Congress. They don't write a lot, so we weren't able to get any words. So the next masters are the Talmudists, and these are those who follow the writings of the Talmud very strictly, and they have some interesting things to share. And I pulled out some of their writings on the uniqueness and sanctity of human life to share. This doctrine of equality does not assert that individuals duplicate one another. A man, the Talmud explains, strikes many coins from one die and they are all alike. The Holy One, blessed be he, however, strikes every person from the die of the first man, but no one resembles another. Their uniqueness is mental as well as physical, and they all have a special function to fulfill in the realization of the cosmic purpose. A person thus has a right to feel that, quote, the universe was created for his sake, unquote, for he has a unique role to play in it, so that the cosmic scheme will be incomplete without him. And that is one of the places from which Talmudists and Jewish derive the same belief that many religions hold of the supreme sanctity of all human life. The Jewish Kabbalists. Here's an interesting statement that reflects really what Kabbalism is doing, but I don't know if all Kabbalists realize that's what Kabbalism is about. This brings us to a further aspect of the doctrine, which is also the most important for the system of practical theosophy. The process in which God conceives, brings forth, and develops himself does not reach its final conclusion in God. Certain parts of the process of restitution are allotted to man. Not all the lights which are held in captivity by the powers of darkness are set free by their own efforts. It is man who adds the final touch to the divine countenance. It is he who completes the enthronement of God, the King and the mystical creator of all things. In his own kingdom of heaven, it is he who perfects the maker of all things. In certain spheres of being, divine and human existence are intertwined. The intrinsic extra-mundane process of tikkun, which is symbolically described as the birth of God's personality, corresponds to the process of mundane history. The historical process and its innermost soul, the religious act of the Jew, prepare the way for the final restitution of all scattered and exiled lights and sparks. The scattering, the multiplicities, and it's preparing the way for the restitution of those multiplicities, the exiled lights, the exiled sparks. A statement made here that sounds ironically very Christian, which is, not all the lights which are held in captivity by the powers of darkness are set free by their own efforts. It is man who adds the final touch to the divine countenance. And this is actually something you don't expect to hear from a Jewish text, because it has much more of a Christian feel to its inner meaning. But again, this is the whole initiations into the mysteries, the rites of the passage, and that's what Kabbalah is. It's the gathering of the multiplicities. Multiplicities are the scattering. The scattering, what's the scattering? It's all of these individual existences, these individual identities that are embodied in many human forms, which are isolated by the nature of our inability to think them into unity. And it is the work of the Kabbalists, the work of the initiations, work of the rites, to bring the oneness, the unity back to the scattering. We enter now into some of the masters of the ancient Egyptian path. So we start out with Thoth, and we're going to talk here from some of the emerald tablets of Thoth the Atlantean. Thoth is usually involved, as well as Hermes, Nefertiti. So it's interesting because regardless of what your own individual propensities or familiarities may be with, many people will find that when they go into the initiations, they will have some type of ancient Egyptian passages. I don't know if this is just because that's the way the initiations play out, or if it's because many of us have those ancient Egyptian roots, or both. Probably a little bit of both. But Thoth was presented to me during the initiations into the mysteries as the keeper of the gateway between worlds, the veils. And it's interesting when you look at the writings from the Emerald Tablets of Thoth the Atlantean, because many of them seem to direct in that direction, but also the Emerald Tablets of Thoth the Atlantean paint him as quite the mystic, as a very, very profound mystic. He says, "Know ye, O my brother, that fear is an obstacle great. Be master of all in the brightness. The shadow will soon disappear. Hear ye and heed my wisdom. The voice of light is clear. Seek not the valley of shadow, and light only will appear. List ye, O man, to the depth of my wisdom. Speak I of knowledge hidden from man. Far have I been on my journeys through space-time, even to the end of the space of this cycle. Found I there the great barrier, holding man from leaving this cycle. Glimpsed I the hounds of the barrier, lying in wait for he who would pass them. In that space where time exists not, faintly I sensed the guardians of cycles. Followed I then the path to the star plains. Followed I then the pathway to light. Deep into earth's heart I followed the pathway, learning the secrets below as above." And so we see, going all the way back, there's nothing new under the sun here. This purification pathway, this path of the mystics, is really quite the same. When you look across these religious barriers, they're similar. You see, they're so similar you could probably not tell who was saying what if you didn't say who was saying it. Hermes, who sometimes is linked as being with Thoth or the same as Thoth, and we just don't know. But we have Hermes separate just because we can, and since it's not known for sure. These are from the divine Pomander. "And if thou wilt even break the whole, and see those things that are without the world, if there be anything without thou mayest, behold how great power, how great swiftness thou hast. Command it to fly into heaven, and it will not need no wings, neither shall anything hinder it, not the fire of the sun, not the ether, not the turning of the spheres, not the bodies of any other stars, but cutting through all, it will fly up to the last and furthest body." Again, Hermes is laying out the purification pathway. And then we have Nefertiti, who ironically I had the honor of seeing last night. She was trying to talk to me about something mysterious from her time that she says is unknown to us today, a cult of Nefertiti. And it was presented to me as a very holy thing. It was very beautiful, and it was very awe-inspiring and wonderful. And it was in this valley of texts, ancient sacred texts. And I was taken specifically first to the Pahlavi texts of the ancient Zoroastrians. Then I was taken over here, and there was just this refined gold where Nefertiti was. And when she recognized that I had recognized her, she smiled and was very happy that I realized it was her, and she wanted me to discover more. So more to come on that someday. We'll have to do some research and continue up with that. But Nefertiti, there's not much that we have that's actually attributed to her, but I found a couple of things attributed to her. I wonder if our names determine our destiny, or if destiny leads us to choose certain names. And another thing attributed to Nefertiti was, you can't change the desert. You can only take the fastest course. Nefertiti was a woman. She was married to Amenhotep. She was the mother of King Tut. And we don't have much that has been recorded of her, just that she was extremely beautiful. And I find it fascinating because even from the very beginning of my journeys, when I was given my wings, when I was told to come forth for thy wings and the initiations into the mysteries, I was given this Nefertiti statue. And I never understood why. Why was I given something like this with a bust of Nefertiti when I was given my angel wings? And so interestingly, last night, here again, there's Nefertiti, and it was shown to me as there being something, and it was definitively clear that it was something that was forgotten to humankind. It's not something that we have in our record of humanity about her and about the cult of Nefertiti that she made reference to, that she said is no longer known about. So I think there's still mysteries for us to unearth. Nothing is lost. So the Library of Alexandria is still in existence there, the Palace of Ancient Knowledge. In terms of what we have for our conscious memory here on Earth, I do think we probably have some things that might have been pivotal and important that we no longer have. And last night was definitely a case where that was being shown to me. I wouldn't be surprised if how we have been told that there may be more epics to the earth than we're aware of, in terms of some people have found evidence of previous potential nuclear blasts where we may have blasted ourselves back to the Stone Age a few times. I wouldn't be surprised if that's happened here based on some of the experiences that I have had. We also have as well, some of the neat experiences that I had as well were when I was taken to meet some of the galactic archaeologists who are translating galactic ancient sacred texts. We forget that we're not the only ones writing these things. There's more for us to still discover. Definitely have not hit the wall on mysteries, that's for sure. This next reading, which is about Isis, it's about the Bembine table of Isis. It's from a manuscript by Thomas Taylor about the Bembine table of Isis, because the next master is Isis from Egypt. And it talks about this whole mystery religion thing, the initiations into the mysteries in the Egypt. Plato was initiated into the greater mysteries at the age of 49. The initiation took place in one of the subterranean halls of the Great Pyramid in Egypt. The Isaic table formed the altar before which the divine Plato stood and received that which was always his, but which the ceremony of the mysteries enkindled and brought from its dormant state. With this ascent, after 3 days in the great hall, he was received by the Hierophant of the pyramid. The Hierophant was seen only by those who had passed the 3 days, the 3 degrees, the 3 dimensions, and given verbally the highest esoteric teachings, each accompanied with its appropriate symbol. After a further 3 months' sojourn in the halls of the pyramid, the initiate Plato was sent out in the world to do the work of the great order, as Pythagoras and Orpheus had been before him. So our next master, the oracle at Delphi. Over the entrance to the temple at Delphi was a famous inscription, "Know thyself." And another quote, taking that just a little further, says that knowing thyself isn't a journey to a fixed destination. And here we're going to move into some mystery religion people. And so we start with Robert Flood, who is a Rosicrucian adept. He's our next master. He said, "Particulars are frequently fallible, but universals never. Occult philosophy lays bare nature in her complete nakedness, and alone contemplates the wisdom of universals by the eyes of intelligence. And the next one is Brother Christian Rosicrucian, Rosicrucian philosopher. He's kind of like the father of them all, Christian Rosicrucian. It's described that his body, is discovered by a brother of the order, was in a perfect state of preservation 120 years after his death, which occurred in absolute secrecy, as Rosicrucian had predicted, apparently. In a heptagonal chamber erected by himself as a storehouse of knowledge, it's described that on the sarcophagus in the center of the crypt of Christian Rosicrucian were written, among other inscriptions, the words, Jesus mihi omnia, nequoquium vacuum libertas evangelii Dei intacta gloria legis jugum, which means Jesus is everything to me, by no means empty, the freedom of the gospel, the untouched glory of God, the yoke of the law. And we move on to Francis Bacon. And one of his famous quotes was that some books are to be tasted, others to be swallowed, and some few to be chewed and digested. He also said, reading maketh a full man, conference a ready man, and writing an exact man. And our next master is Jacob Boehme, one of my faves. He utilized a lot of his writings in the Christ of the Redemption. One of the things that he said is, it is not to be thought that the life of darkness is sunk in misery and lost as if in sorrowing. There is no sorrowing, for sorrow is a thing that is swallowed up in death, and death and dying are the very life of the darkness. A shepherd in whom the Spirit of God works is more highly esteemed before God than the wisest and most potent in self-wit without the divine dominion. And here is something again, bringing us all the way back to the beginning where we started with Babaji. Love is higher than the highest. Love is greater than the greatest. Yea, it is in a certain sense greater than God, while yet in the highest sense of all, God is love and love is God. Love being the highest principle is the virtue of all virtues, from whence they flow forth. So you see how many mystics try so hard to explain what love is as field and vibration. And there's no way to really completely do that, but we do it the best we can. And the next masters in at the feet of the masters are the three grand masters of the Freemasonry Lodge in Jerusalem. A quote from one of the masters of the Freemasonry order was George Washington, and he said, being persuaded that a just application of the principles on which the Masonic fraternity is founded must be promotive of private virtue and public prosperity, I shall always be happy to advance the interests of the society and to be considered by them as a deserving brother. And one of the Freemasonic slogans is, well done is better than well said. And Pythagoras, one of the great mystery masters, says, as soon as laws are necessary for men, they are no longer fit for freedom. And of course, silence is better than unmeaning words. Pythagoras being one of the great spiritual philosophical masters who also brought mathematics and geometry into all of those paths. Brilliant master. Louis Claude de Saint Martin said, for our personal advancement in virtue and truth, one quality is sufficient, namely love. To advance humanity, there must be two, love and intelligence. To accomplish the great work, there must be three: love, intelligence, and activity. And yet love is ever the root and the source. And Louis Claude de Saint Martin was this great mystic philosopher, mystery religion adept of his time, kind of like a saint in the mystery religion path. And our next one, Manly P. Hall, the great writer, he said, when the human race learns to read the knowledge of symbolism, a great veil will fall from the eyes of men. They shall then know truth, and more than that, they shall realize that from the beginning, truth has been in the world unrecognized, save by a small but gradually increasing number appointed by the lords of the dawn as ministers to the needs of human creatures struggling to regain their consciousness of divinity. That's from Melchizedek and the Mystery of Fire. He wrote a lot of books, and he says the esoteric system is all based upon the ultimate motive. Ultimate motive is the service of truth itself, a complete dedication to the service of the realities of existence. And so the next mystery master is Count Saint Germain, the legendary immortal. He says, attention is the key. Attention is the key, for where man's attention goes, there goes his energy. And he himself can only follow. Anxiety must go. It must be replaced by faith and solemn confidence in the outworking of the divine plan. What he's pointing out is such a basic eternal concept that we all have to understand if we're pursuing the spiritual path, which is where your attention lies is where your energy goes. So pay close attention to what is your primary focus. What is 95% of your output going towards? The next person is Ceres, the patron of the mysteries. Ceres is a mythological master. And what I found about Ceres was this: where the satyrs are chattering, nymphs with their flattering, glimpse of the forest, enhance all the beauty of marrow and cucumber narrow, and Ceres will join in the dance. The patron of the mysteries. And then Odin of Scandinavia is next. Odin, king of Asgard, protector of the 9 realms. And here's just a little anecdotal tale from the northern myths. This one's from Patriarch Column, the children of Odin, from the mythologies of Scandinavia and Norway. Thor looked out on the 2 great rolling rivers of cloud. It was a bad way for one to go, cold and suffocating, yet if he went that way, he could keep on his shoulder the hammer which he would not leave in another's charge. He stepped out into the cloud river that flowed by the rainbow bridge, and with his hammer upon his shoulder, he went struggling on to the other river. Odin, Tyr, Baldur were beside Ursa's well when Thor came struggling out of the cloud river, wet and choking, but with his hammer still upon his shoulder. There stood Tyr, upright and handsome, leaning on his sword that was inscribed all over with magic runes. There stood Baldur, smiling with his heart bent as he listened to the murmur of the 2 fair swans. And there stood Odin, All-Father, clad in his blue cloak, fringed with golden stars, without the eagle helmet upon his head, and with no spear in his hands. Majestic description of Odin from the myths. And the next one is the Queen of Avalon. And this is an interesting character because this is the Queen of Avalon who had a dual personality. Morgan Le Fay at a particular period in her life, so one point light, another point dark. As a druidic practitioner, Morgan Le Fay, your music hurts the way sunshine hurts when you've existed for a long time in darkness. Not dissimilar to the stories of the great great wise one who then fell from grace. That's what we have here with the Queen of Avalon, Morgan Le Fay. And there is a quote in La Morte d'Arthur, which is one of the more traditional ancient texts on the Arthurian legend. And this is a Morgan Le Fay quote. Queen Morgan loves Sir Launcelot best, and ever she desired him, and he would never love her nor do nothing at her request. And therefore she held many knights together for to have taken him by strength. And because she deemed that Sir Launcelot loved Queen Guinevere paramour, and she him again. Therefore Queen Morgan Le Fay ordained that shield to put Sir Launcelot to rebukes, to that intent that King Arthur might understand the love between them. And so that, of course, was the downfall from the Queen of Avalon and how she fell into the dark magic. And the next master is Dicteri, a Druidic Celtic woman. She actually returned from the mystical spheres with a child of the heavenly realms. She disappeared for 3 years into the clouds and returned 3 years later, bearing the child Cuchulainn. Cuchulainn became a big character in the mythological histories and was a great master in the Celtic mythology. And this is one of the few that I was able to find that's actually a sort of a quote from Cuchulainn. When Pierce summoned Cuchulainn to his side, what stalked through? What intellect, what calculation, number, measurement replied? We Irish, born into that ancient sect, but thrown upon this filthy modern tide, and by its formless spawning fury wrecked, climb to our proper dark, that we may trace the lineaments of a plummet measured face. And then moving to, of course, the legendary Merlin, the Druidic practitioner in the court of King Arthur, who also, legends tell us that we don't know, was he serving the light? Was he serving the dark? It sounds like he did a little bit of both at different times in his life. Then Merlin said, quote, "You must now go on in the service of God, who restored you as you now see yourself, you who for so many years lived in the desert like a wild beast, going about without a sense of shame. Now that you have recovered your reason, do not shun the bushes or the green glades which you inhabited while you were mad, but stay with me, that you may strive to make up in service to God for the days that the force of madness took from you. From now on, all things shall be in common between you and me in this service, so long as either lives." And that's a very common statement and sentiment of the masters. Milarepa was another one, had a similar sentiment, where they seek to do as much time in good as they spent in evil proper. And that was from the Vita Merlini, the Latin text by Geoffrey of Monmouth, the Bishop of St. Aphaf, from 1100. Pretty cool ancient text. Zarathustra and Zoroastrianism. Zarathustra, the first monotheistic great world religion, which was Zoroastrianism, before Christianity, Judaism, Islam. It was after Amenhotep, but Amenhotep, his reign was short. And so he had people follow monotheistic tradition for a very short period of time. But Zarathustra was actually a prophet, and he founded Zoroastrianism, which was a religion which held true, the scriptures of which include the Zend-Avesta, the Pahlavi texts, and others, which ironically Zarathustra was the master who really defined the worlds of good and evil, the battles between good and evil in the worlds of light and darkness in the spiritual realms. There is always some of this kind of stuff going on, and that is kind of the nature of mortal realms. That kind of gives us some context to kind of throw it in. So some of the things he said Turn yourself not away from three best things: good thought, good word, and good deed. By my love and my hope, I beseech you, do not forsake the hero in your soul. And here's something from the Avesta. The man of Armayati is bounteous and with understanding in his words and actions. May Ahura give him that righteousness which is blessed, together with the religion and that sovereign power which is established through the good mind. I would pray for this same blessing from his grace. And then we have some quotes from a famous book by Nietzsche. So these are not actual Zarathustra quotes, but these are from Thus Spoke Zarathustra, and these are Zarathustra speaking in Nietzsche's rendition. The higher we soar, the smaller we appear to those who cannot fly. You must be ready to burn yourself in your own flame. That's purification. There was a miraculous birth involved with Zarathustra. It was said that Zarathustra's birth was foretold from the beginning of time, and the moment he was born, he burst out laughing, and the whole universe rejoiced with him. And after his birth, evil demons tried to destroy him, but with Ahura Mazda's protection, he survived all attempts on his life. Just as, Islams have Allah, Christians have God, Jews and Christians have El Shaddai, Yahweh, Jehovah, all these different names for God. Ahura Mazda was the name that Zarathustra had for God. Some of the images from Zarathustra's life: the miracle of the bridge of ice, the bringing back of the light and the law, the picture of him as teach former, his death at the fire temple, a yearly celebration that they do at the fire temple, and some ancient drawings of Zarathustra. It's very hard to get a lot of good detailed information about these historical events online, which is kind of sad. And I even looked through all my ancient books and my ancient texts here, trying to find more information on these events, but at least we have knowledge that these events occurred. We just don't have a lot more knowledge than that. Taoism, some things that are lesser known. We'll start with our most well-known Taoist, but I want to start with a lesser known text, the Wen Tzu, which was Understanding the Mysteries, which was written by Lao Tzu. Something that he said that I think really sums up Taoism quite well. Lao Tzu said, "If the sky were not steady, the sun and moon would have nowhere to ride. If the earth were not steady, plants and trees would have nowhere to stand. If the body is not steady, right and wrong have nowhere to form. Therefore, there is real knowledge only when there are real people. If what it holds is not clear, how do we know that what we call knowledge is not unknowing? They are humane who have long been generous with valuable goods to make all the people happy so that they enjoy their lives. They are dutiful who do great works and make known an inspiring reputation, comprehend leadership and administration, make the social order correct, make kinship and strangerhood clear, keep endangered nations in existence, perpetuate societies that have broken down, and foster those who have no posterity. They are virtuous who close their senses, put away their aspirations and intentions, cast off their intellectual brilliance, and return to a vastness where there is no conscious knowing, meander beyond the dust and dirt, Roam in the realm where there is nothing of concern, drink in darkness and spew out light, and harmonize with all beings and all things. Therefore, when the way disperses, it becomes virtue. When virtue overflows, it becomes humaneness and dutifulness. When humanity and duty are set up, however, the way and virtue go out of fashion. I'm going to say that last line again because I think that's a little bit of an unexpected twist. When humanity and duty are set up, the way and virtue go out of fashion. So here he's speaking again of the structures that we set up as human beings around religious and spiritual ideas that then have a tendency to then taint the real spiritual way. Another thing from the Wen Tzu that Lao Tzu says, when asked about justice, Lao Tzu said, if you are in a superior position, you help the weak. If you are in a subordinate position, you maintain control over yourself. Don't indulge in your whims when you are successful, and don't get excitable when you are in straits. Follow reason uniformly without bending it subjectively. This is called justice. Lin Jai, which is someone who's not as well known, and Lin Jai was the founder of Taoism. Someone asked, what is the illness? The master answered, subtle arisings of the mind are the illness. The questioner asked further, what is the medicine? The master answered, not continuing on. This is the medicine. We've taken this journey together, following the world religions in the order of their appearance in the world. We have to restore something which we have lost, and that is the transmission point between those who have come before us and those who remain behind.